Hi, welcome back to the Science of Flow. Okay, we're on to the neuroscience of the flow state. And if you remember in the previous video, I was explaining about Chris Berker, and she was doing a study on the snipers and the archers. And I was telling you about the EEG devices and how she was using these EEG devices to pull them into a sweet spot, a specific brain frequency. Now those frequencies are actually electrical messages firing off between different neurons and cells in your body. These are messages going between cell to cell, neuron to neuron, etc. Okay. Now these frequencies are broken down into different cycles per second or hertz. So you'll see the EEG graphs, and you'll see there's a lot of lines like this going up. Okay, so those are very fast. Okay, those very fast ones are known as gamma spikes, and they are between 40 to 80 hertz. Then you have beta, which is between 12 and 40 hertz. Okay, alpha 8 to 12, theta 4 to 8, and then the delta is between 0 and 4 hertz. Okay, so that's cycles per second. So if the gamma is going like this, the delta is loud and long. Okay. Now what we want to be doing is we want to be tuning in to a specific frequency. There's a flow state frequency, and the flow state frequency is between these two, and it's known as the alpha theta bridge. Now, as you can see, it's between both are at 8, so the sweet spot is between 7 and 8 cycles per second. Now, another way of looking at this cycle per second is introducing something called heart rate variability that we'll get to shortly in the coming videos. And when you find the sweet spot for your heart rate variability, the sweet spot for the electromagnetic frequencies of the heart, it actually connects with the earth, and the earth has something called the Schumann frequency. So its electromagnetic frequency vibrates, cycles in a certain frequency, and that frequency is 7.83 hertz. Okay. Now, the Schumann frequency, yes, it has evolved and adapted, it's changed, and there's a reason why, and you can read why in my book, The Heart of Flow. But for just now, I find it very exciting and interesting that the flow state frequency between the 7 and 8 cycles per second is also pretty damn close to that Schumann frequency. So a little trick, a little hack for you is that when you ground yourself, earth yourself, you'll automatically begin to sync with the Earth's electromagnetic frequency, which just so happens to be 7.83 hertz, which just so happens to be this alpha theta bridge. Okay, so the electrical signals are going on. What we're really focusing on is these, alpha and theta. Okay, I just want to touch on the beta. Now beta is the kind of frequency that you're in day to day, generally speaking. Okay, and that day to day frequency is like when you're focusing on something. However, as you probably know, you can focus too much and you create tension in your system. You're overthinking, over-analyzing. This is generally known as a high beta wave state. And what that kind of does is it blocks you, holds you back. You're in a confused, distracted, distressed, fearful state when you're in a high beta. And it's a common trap for a vast majority of society. What you want to do is build your awareness to the flow state and lower yourself down into this alpha theta pocket. Maintain that 7.83 hertz for as long as you possibly. In fact, it needs to be your new set point. It needs to be your new delta, if you like, your new day to day. You want to get yourself down there, and whenever you have to use delta for a bit more focus and concentration, just try not to go too high. Okay, so I want to jump on now to the lobes of the brain. So when you look at the brain, you generally know of right and left hemispheres, but you can look at it a little bit deeper, if you like, and you look at the different lobes. So you have the frontal lobe, occipital, parietal, and temporal lobe. Okay, so the frontal lobe at the front. Okay, so that houses and that makes us what is human generally. It plays a role in everything from movement and anticipates the consequences. So it really is the part of the brain that makes us human. Then you have the occipital, easy for not me to say, which is the visual cortex. Okay, so this is at the back here. And this is this helps us with visual remembering certain things. Okay. Then you have the parietal lobe, which is here. The parietal lobe helps with language, spatial awareness, and the navigation in time and space. It helps us tell us where we are in time and space. The temporal lobe, which is the auditory centre, so it's right here. Okay, so that also helps with the understanding of language, pattern recognition, and it also helps us retain emotions and remember auditory type of things. Okay, so frontal, occipital, parietal, and temporal. Okay. Now, the cool thing is that there was research done by a guy called Dr. Andrew Newberg, and Dr. Andrew Newberg did research on monks and nuns. And what he did was he hooked them up to what's called a SPEC device, and what that does is it tracks and monitors what's actually going on in the brain. Also, his research also pointed out what's going on with the heart as well, heart rate variability. And what he found was that when the monks and the nuns were meditating, the brain patterns were very, very similar. There was a few slight differences. Some areas were more light than the other, depending on the type of meditation that we're doing. For instance, the monks did a bit more of a visual meditation, so their occipital lobe was a little bit more heightened. And the nuns were doing more, I think it was the more temporal activations, a bit more of a mantra type thing going on when they were doing it. But the patterns were very, very similar, which is really cool. So the parts of the brain lit up and other parts of the brain lessened in activity. And what they also noticed is that there was a heart rate coherence that was going on. And that links into the 7.83 Hertz, the heart rate coherence. Heart rate variability is a way of measuring the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. What Newberg found was that there was a push and pull going on between the sympathetic, fight or flight, fight, flight or freeze, parasympathetic, rest or digest. There was this dance going on between the two, maintaining a coherence. So there was a coherence in the heart rate variability, and then there was a lessening and activation of different areas of different parts of the brain. Also, when we look a little bit deeper, dive in there, you look behind this and there's a thing called a limbic system. Now the limbic system is kind of like the old brain, the reptilian type brain type thing, okay? And what that is, it's a complex network of nerves inside the brain, and it's connected you to sort of emotions. So these emotions are sort of fear, pleasure, anger. Then you also get the drivers, so your hunger, sex, dominance. These are all in this sort of limbic system. When the limbic system is agitated, when the limbic system is frustrated, these are heightened. You become more fearful, more anxious, more angry, more irritable. You have a desire for dominance, okay, when the limbic system is further stimulated. And how this happens is because these complex nerves up here are linked to your autonomic nervous system, it's linked to your heart rate variability, and so on. So the autonomic nervous system, fight or flight, fight, flight or freeze, rest and digest. If you are in an anxious, fearful state all the time, and you always think that every situation around you is confrontational, your body will be in a sympathetic state more. When it's in a more sympathetic state, it's triggering and affecting the nerves, which is making you more fearful, more angry, more tense, more dominant, more hungry. Then you also have the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is associated with your cognitive processes, logic, problem solving, planning, and time. Now, when I was telling you about the processes of Newberg when they were doing the meditations with the monks and the nuns, and I was telling you about these areas of the brain were lighting up or lessening in activity, the limbic system was a bit quieter, obviously, because there was a coherence, because of the autonomic nervous system. There seemed to be this alpha theta bridge, which was in a coherence, FYI. I don't know why, we don't know why, but when you're in this bridge, you're open to these aha moments, these creative sparks. The gamma spike is the house of these creative sparks. So for some reason, we don't know why, but when you're in this, you're open to these idea moments. Anyway, so jumping back, so when we're in the research, when your brain waves are in these lessening activation, limbic system is purring, the prefrontal cortex is temporarily shut down, and this is called transient hypofrontality. Transient means temporary, hypo, slow, and prefrontal cortex is a frontality. So what actually happens when you're in a flow state is you go through that transient hypofrontality where areas of the brain are lessening in activity and the other areas of the brain are more switched on and stimulated. Your brain waves are in the alpha theta pocket, but you're open to these aha moments, these gamma spikes. So this is what happens inside the brain. This is one part of it that happens inside the brain that science knows today. It's not as black and white and as clear. Like the monks and the nuns, they had that same sensations, but different areas of the brain were lightening up. But they were very, very damn similar. And what was very cool is there's something called the dorsal parietal occipital lobe, okay? Right at the back here. And this connection point, this junction, the dorsolateral parietal junction, that junction point, okay, where the two meet, is apparently the area where we distinguish the difference between self and other, okay? Now, during the meditation, both the monks and the nuns expressed that sensation of being at one with what they were doing. And there was a lessening of activity there. And it's really interesting because they both felt that feeling of being at one. But it's the same language that's used by the elite sports athletes when they are maybe feeling at one with the mountain, or at one with the wave, or at one with their training. They're completely dissolved in what they're doing. So this area that lessens in activity is fascinating because it links into what the research has found in the psychology of flow, of everybody verbalizing the fact that they feel at one with what they're doing. And we'll come on to that in the future videos. I say future videos, the future videos of this course. So, stay tuned. We're going to go a little bit deeper into the neurotransmitters or hormones, or what actually happens during the flow state. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.